My name is Caleb Morgan. I'm 29 years old. And this is the story of how my father waited for my mother's final breath just so he could cut me out of everything she built. What he didn't know was that she spent her last 2 years preparing a plan one that would bring his entire empire crashing down the moment he thought he'd finally won. If you enjoy stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. I guess I should start with what my life looked like before everything fell apart. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect upper-middle-class Boston family. My father, Jonathan Morgan, the charming financial mogul. My mother, Grace, the quiet force behind his success. And me, the son people liked to introduce as the future of Morgan Capital. That was always his line. A tagline, an illusion. The truth was far quieter, far smaller. For the last 6 years, I'd worked in my father's investment firm. Officially, I was a junior analyst. Unofficially, I was the guy who did everyone's research, built the models, solved crises at 3 a.m., and sat silently while my father presented my work as his own. It didn't start that way. At 23, fresh out of Wharton, I walked into Morgan Capital believing I'd earned something. That belief lasted about 3 hours. "You're not ready to be seen as leadership," my father had said, not even looking up from his desk. "You'll shadow me, learn, earn your place." Months turned into years. My responsibilities grew. The recognition never followed.
He called it legacy building. I later learned it was code for, "You exist to make me look good."
The only person who ever challenged him was my mother. She had this gentle, steady way of calling him out without raising her voice. "Jonathan, give him credit where it's due," she'd say during dinner after another back-to-back workday. "He's carrying more weight than your entire management team." He'd wave her off every time. "Grace, you spoil him." Success must be earned. She'd look at me across the table with a small, apologetic smile, and I'd shrug like it didn't bother me. But of course it did. I just didn't know how deeply until later. Everything changed the day she was diagnosed. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. Too advanced for surgery, too late for hope. She absorbed the news with this eerie calm, as though part of her had been expecting it. My father reacted differently.
He didn't cry, didn't hold her, didn't ask questions.
He just stared at the doctor like someone had told him his retirement plans had been delayed. Within a month, he'd moved into the guest room for better sleep. He stopped attending her treatments, claiming critical meetings. He left early, came home late, and began drinking scotch with a kind of greedy desperation. But the worst part? He stopped pretending to tolerate me. Every week, he came into the office earlier, snapped more often, dismissed my work without reading it. "You're a drain on resources," he said one morning during a meeting in front of 6 other analysts. "If you weren't Grace's son, you wouldn't be here at all." My mother wasn't there to hear it. She was at chemo, alone. And that was the day something shifted in me. A quiet anger, a quiet understanding. I knew then that he was waiting. Waiting for the moment she wasn't around to stop him from doing what he'd wanted all along, cutting me out of his life, his company, and his definition of family. I just didn't know how far he'd go until the end. The last week of her life still feels unreal. My mother had become so thin I could feel every bone when I helped her sit up in bed. Her voice was barely a whisper. Even then, she apologized for being a burden. She never understood she'd been the only good thing holding this family together. 3 days before she died, she asked me for something strange. "Caleb, the blue binder." In my closet. When I brought it to her, she slid her hand over the cover as though it were something sacred. "If anything happens before your father comes home tonight," she murmured, "I need you to remember a name. A very important name." "What name?" "Elias Turner." A cough cut through her words. "He's the key to everything." I didn't understand, not then. I thought she was delirious from the pain meds. She smiled weakly, this sad, knowing smile, and touched my cheek. "Your father underestimates you. He always has, but you'll know what to do when the time comes." I didn't know she had planned something. I didn't know she had been watching him, documenting him, preparing something monumental. I didn't know she'd been building a trap, the last trap he'd ever walk into. She died at 2:19 a.m. My father came out of the guest room at 6 a.m. Showered, shaved, wearing a suit worth more than my car. "How long ago?" he asked. 4 hours. He nodded once. No emotion, no grief. Then he picked up his phone. James, schedule the will reading today. Not the funeral, not family. Not condolences, her will. That was the moment I knew. He'd been waiting for her last breath. And he didn't plan on waiting a minute more. I didn't expect the will reading to happen the same afternoon my mother died. But that's exactly what my father arranged. By 3 p.m., the house was already full. Our attorney, Margaret Ellis, sat by the fireplace, her legal pad neatly organized. My father hovered behind her like a victorious general, waiting to collect the spoils from a war he never even fought. I sat across from them, completely numb from exhaustion and grief. The hospice nurse had only left 2 hours earlier. The scent of morphine and hospital-grade sanitizer still clung to the air, a stark reminder of what we'd just lost. And yet, here we were, dividing what was left of my mother's life, like it was nothing more than a business negotiation. My father clasped his hands together, impatience radiating off him in waves. Let's get on with it, he said, his voice clipped and cold. Margaret adjusted her glasses, ignoring his dismissive tone. Your wife's instructions are very clear, Jonathan. We'll follow them in order. She opened the folder, and the crisp sound of paper filled the tense silence. My heart started to thud against my ribs. Not because of the money. I wasn't expecting anything. It was because I wasn't ready to hear her voice again, not through words she'd written long before she left us. It was too soon. It felt wrong. Margaret took a slow, steadying breath and began to read. To my beloved son, Caleb. The second I heard my name, my father's jaw shifted. It was a small tick, almost imperceptible, but it was a warning sign I'd learned to recognize since I was a child. It meant he was displeased. I leave my personal jewelry collection, the contents of my private art studio, and access to my secure storage unit at Harbor Square. A storage unit. She'd never once mentioned a storage unit. I glanced at my father, but he didn't react, though his eyes flicked toward me, calculating, irritated. Margaret continued. I also leave Caleb the sum of $200,000 to assist in his transition and independence. Transition? Independence? My stomach tightened into a knot. She knew what my father had planned for me. She knew he wanted me out of the house, out of his life, the moment she was gone. I blinked hard, fighting back the sting in my eyes. Meanwhile, my father leaned back in his chair, a smug smirk playing on his lips. Now that the sentimentalities are out of the way, he muttered, just loud enough for us to hear. Margaret ignored him completely. To my husband, Jonathan. My father straightened up, his posture rigid with anticipation. This was it. The moment he'd been waiting for her shares in the company, her vast fortune, her family estate. Everything he'd been after. I leave the primary residence, our investment properties, and my financial assets totaling approximately $33 million. He exhaled sharply, a rush of air, as if he'd been holding his breath for weeks, maybe even years. The look of pure triumph on his face was sickening. Margaret's voice cut through his satisfaction. On the condition that my son, Caleb Morgan, is permitted to reside in the family home for 1 full year after my passing, with full access to all shared living spaces, financial support equal to current household expenditures, and no alteration to his employment status at Morgan Capital. Silence, stillness, the kind of absolute quiet that feels like all the air has just been sucked out of the room. My father's triumphant expression curdled into something dark and ugly. His complexion shifted, first pale, then blotchy, then flushed with a growing, simmering rage. What? He breathed, the word barely a whisper. Margaret continued, completely unfazed by his reaction. She flipped to the next page. If this condition is violated in any way, her voice was calm, almost clinical. All assets listed above will instead transfer to the Grace Morgan Foundation, established 2 years prior, under the executive direction of Elias Turner. The name my mother had whispered just days before she died. I finally understood. My father erupted from his chair. What foundation? What the hell is she talking about?
He roared. Margaret spoke with the profound calm of someone who had seen 1,000 family meltdowns.
Your wife established the foundation in 2022. I have been managing the filings and legal paperwork since its creation. She didn't have the authority to do that, he sputtered. She had full legal authority, Margaret stated, her voice firm. He whirled around to face me, pointing a shaking finger as if I had personally orchestrated this entire thing. You knew about this. I didn't, I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady. But she tried to tell me something before she died. That only seemed to make him angrier. She set me up, he hissed, his voice venomous. She planned this. She planned all of this. She planned protection, Margaret corrected him, her gaze unwavering. That's very different. He started pacing the room like a wild animal trapped in a cage. All of it, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. 33 million, my house, my properties, all going to some charity if he jabbed a finger in my direction. Stays here for a year? No, Margaret corrected him again, her words sharp and precise. Going to a foundation that carries your wife's name, not yours. It was a direct hit. I saw it land, saw him physically recoil from her words. He slammed his fist against the mantel with a crack of bone against stone. A photo of my mother tipped over and fell, the glass in the frame shattering as it hit the hardwood floor. I flinched, but Margaret didn't even blink. You can follow the conditions, she said evenly. Or you can forfeit everything. The choice is yours, Jonathan. My father stared at her, then at me, then at the broken frame on the floor. His breathing was ragged. His voice, when it came out, was low, controlled, and laced with pure venom. I won't be blackmailed by my own wife. Then you'll lose everything she left you, Margaret replied, without a hint of emotion. For a long moment I thought he might scream, or throw something else, or just storm out of the room. Instead he did something far worse. He smiled. A thin, cold, terrifying smile that didn't come anywhere near his eyes. That's fine, he said calmly, his voice chillingly pleasant. Let him stay. Let him enjoy his little victory. He walked toward the doorway, pausing to pick up his discarded suit jacket. But make no mistake, Caleb, he said, his back still to me. I will find a way around this, and when I do, you'll be gone before you can even take a breath. He didn't know it then. He had no idea what my mother had already uncovered, what she had documented, what she had prepared for.
He didn't know that the foundation held more than just money. It held secrets, his secrets.
And it was only a matter of time before they all detonated. My mother had not just protected me. She had armed me. And my father had just declared a war he was destined to lose. Thanks for watching. Be sure to follow for the next part. For the next 3 days, the house felt like a pressure cooker, silent, heavy, and ready to explode at the slightest spark. My father barely looked at me, but the air around him vibrated with calculation. You could almost see the gears in his head turning, hunting for loopholes, for weaknesses, for anything he could twist to his advantage. He was a man who had spent decades bending rules. My mother knew that. That's why she built a trap he couldn't wiggle out of so easily. On the morning after the will reading, I woke to the sound of drawers slamming, heavy footsteps, a phone buzzing every few minutes. I found him in his office, pacing between 2 stacks of legal documents. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled in a way I had only seen during financial crises. He didn't look up when I entered. You're leaving today, he said flatly. No, I replied, equally flat. Mom's conditions. I don't care about your mother's conditions. There was something chilling in his voice. Not loud, not emotional, just cold, like ice forming over a lake. You always needed everything handed to you, he continued. Well, not anymore.
That ends today.
I didn't argue. I didn't yell. It was useless. I had learned long ago that logic wasn't the language he understood. Instead, I walked past him and made coffee. He followed me into the kitchen like a shadow. You're choosing to defy me? He sounded almost amused. I'm following Mom's wishes, I said quietly. Grace was weak, he snapped. She let emotion get in the way of reality. I won't make the same mistake. I froze, weak. My mother, who held our family together for 30 years. My mother, who protected me every time he tried to cut me down. My mother, who, while dying, found the strength to outmaneuver him. If she was weak, what did that make him? He grabbed his keys and walked out without another word. The slam of the front door echoed through every hallway. Around noon, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. My breath caught. Elias Turner, the name my mother whispered. The name written into her conditions. The name tied to the foundation that now stood between my father and $33 million. I opened the message. The subject line read, "Your mother's instructions." It said, "Caleb, your mother appointed me as executive director of the Grace Morgan Foundation 2 years ago. She left explicit instructions that I contact you no later than 72 hours after her passing. Please confirm you're available today at 5 p.m. for a meeting. The location is attached. There's something she wanted you to see." Elias. My heart raced. My mother had been planning this for 2 years, before her diagnosis, before the worst of the decline. Before my father started counting down the days like her death was a financial windfall. What had she known? What had she been preparing for? I clicked the attachment, a simple location pin. Harbor Square Storage, Unit 314. The storage unit mentioned in her will. Suddenly, the air felt heavier. It wasn't just a storage unit. Not if Elias was involved. Not if my mother tied it to a foundation built to protect me. I typed back a confirmation, then spent the rest of the afternoon pacing. My father hadn't returned. Good. I didn't want him anywhere near what I was about to uncover. At 4:30, I grabbed my coat and drove to Harbor Square. It was one of those upscale, climate-controlled storage facilities, clean glass doors, coated gates, polished concrete floors. The kind of place people used for expensive art or old money heirlooms, not secrets, not traps. At least not usually. When the first reached Unit 314, a tall man in his mid-40s was waiting. Dark hair, wire-rimmed glasses, calm posture. "Caleb?"
His voice was steady, warm. Yes. He extended his hand.
"I'm Elias. She spoke about you often." Something tightened in my throat. "What's in there?" He hesitated. "Evidence, documentation, plans she didn't have the time to explain." He unlocked the unit. The metal door rolled up, revealing shelves stacked from floor to ceiling with labeled boxes, binders, hard drives, even sealed envelopes. Everything meticulously organized in my mother's beautiful handwriting. Elias stepped aside. "This is everything your mother gathered," he said, "and everything she left for you." I walked inside slowly, my chest tight. It didn't look like a storage unit. It looked like a case file on my father. I reached for the closest binder. The label read, "Financial Transfers, Unauthorized 2018-2024. Another one, "Corporate Misconduct, Morgan Capital."
And another, "Personal Accounts, Richard Morgan."
And then I saw the one that made my hands tremble. "To Caleb, open only after I'm gone." I didn't open it. Not yet, I wasn't ready. Elias watched me carefully. "She started 2 years ago," he said softly. "Long before the diagnosis. She told me she suspected your father was preparing to sever you from the company. From the household, from everything." I swallowed hard. "She tried to warn me." "I know," Elias said. "She also told me he would try to remove you immediately after she passed."
He gestured to the rows of binders. "She built this to make sure he couldn't."
I pressed a hand to my forehead. "Why me? Why tell me all of this?" Elias gave me a sad, knowing smile. "Because she trusted that you would finish what she couldn't." I looked around the unit again at her handwriting, her notes, her careful documentation of everything my father had hidden. This could ruin him," I whispered. Elias nodded. "That was the point." As we locked up the unit, I noticed someone standing near the exit. Tall, broad-shouldered, hands in his pockets. My father, watching, he didn't approach, didn't speak. But his expression said everything. He knew I had found something. And for the first time in my life, he looked afraid of me. My father wasn't the kind of man who panicked.
He didn't shout and he didn't lose his composure, he calculated.
Which is why seeing him standing outside the storage facility, shoulders stiff, jaw tense, eyes sharp with worry, told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't in control anymore, and he knew it. He didn't greet me as I approached, didn't acknowledge Elias beside me. He simply watched with a strained smile that didn't match his expression. "So," he said softly, "busy afternoon?" I stopped a few feet away. Elias instinctively stepped between us, calm and steady. "I'm doing what my mother asked me to do," I replied. "Oh, I'm sure," he said. She always appreciated dramatic timing. His eyes dropped to the storage unit key in my hand. And what exactly did she leave you?
He asked. Old keepsakes, photos, letters.
Elias answered gently but firmly. These materials belong to the foundation and are protected legally. They're not available for review. My father's smile thinned. Be careful how you speak to me, he said. Elias didn't waver. I'm speaking on behalf of your wife's instructions. Something in my father's expression tightened. But instead of reacting, he adjusted his jacket and stepped back. Well, he said, I'll see you both at home. He walked away quickly, but not before giving me a final, pointed look. Not angry, not loud, just uneasy. He knew something was shifting. Back at the house, things changed almost immediately. He moved through the hallways with brisk, measured steps. He made calls behind closed doors. He checked his email constantly, like someone watching a storm gather on the horizon. At dinner, if sitting across from each other in silence counted as dinner, he sipped water slowly, staring at the table instead of the food. After several minutes, he finally spoke. You think you're secure here?
He asked quietly. I'm honoring Mom's wishes, I said.
That's all, he exhaled, the sound sharp with frustration. Your mother didn't understand long-term plans, he said. She acted emotionally. I kept my voice steady. She did what she believed was right. He stood abruptly, pacing the length of the dining room. You've always relied on her, he said, but she's not here now. And I'm not adjusting my entire life around your expectations. He paused, looking out the window. If you stay, your experience here won't be simple. He said it calmly, without raising his voice, but the message was clear. I didn't respond. There was nothing productive to say. I left the room without arguing. Silence was the only approach he couldn't twist. 2 days passed with an odd stillness. Then, quietly, things began to shift. My company access card stopped working. My email account froze. My parking pass was suddenly invalid. When I called Human Resources, they gave me the same answer each time. Per temporary administrative review. Your account access is paused, not removed, not altered, just held. It was a clever workaround. Technically, he wasn't violating the will. But practically, he was boxing me out of my future. That afternoon, Elias called. Caleb, he said gently, your mother expected this. A tight breath left me. Of course she did. She prepared extensive records, he continued. Information she believed you might need depending on how your father responded. My voice was quiet. What kind of information? Elias hesitated only for a moment. Financial inconsistencies, he said carefully. Mismanagement concerns. Areas that could create serious complications if reviewed by professionals. I swallowed. That's serious. If this material were submitted to oversight committees, he said, your father could face major consequences. But your mother didn't gather it out of resentment. She gathered it because she believed accountability matters. I sat down slowly. She wanted me to decide what happens next, I said. Yes, Elias replied. She trusted you to choose wisely. I rubbed my forehead, the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. This could change his entire life. It could, Elias said softly. But your mother didn't want vengeance. She wanted fairness. And she wanted you to act from clarity, not anger. I stared at the floor. What do I do? You consider the impact, Elias said, and you choose the path that aligns with who you want to become. I took a long breath. He was right. My father made decisions based on control and fear. I couldn't do the same. But I also couldn't ignore everything my mother had entrusted to me. For the first time in my life, my next decision would shape both our futures. And this time, I wasn't operating under his shadow. The morning after Elias's call, I woke up before the sun. I hadn't tossed and turned all night. In fact, I'd slept soundly for the first time in weeks. It was a strange, sudden clarity that had woken me. In the quiet of the pre-dawn house, a realization settled over me, simple and profound. My mother hadn't left me a battle. She had left me a choice. A chance to decide the kind of person I wanted to be, completely separate from my father's influence. I wouldn't be reactive. I wouldn't be afraid. And I would no longer make myself small to fit into his world. I made my way down to her old art studio. This was her sanctuary, the room she'd fill with color during quiet mornings. My father rarely stepped inside. He always claimed the smell of turpentine and oil paints disrupted his focus. I think he just didn't understand the peace she found here. As soft sunlight began to filter through the large skylight, I found the binder. It was plain, unassuming, with a simple label written in her elegant script. To Caleb, open only after I'm gone. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. Inside there was no mountain of evidence, no damning dossier, just a single folded letter. Her handwriting was as familiar to me as my own. It read, "My son, if you're reading this, your father has already made decisions that hurt you. I know him well enough to predict that." I could almost hear her voice, calm and steady, as I read on. "I didn't gather information to destroy him. I gathered it to protect you because I knew you would eventually reach a crossroads that he couldn't influence. You must choose with a clear heart. I raised you to be thoughtful, steady, and kind. So trust your nature, not your fear. If you decide to take action, it should be for accountability, not revenge. If you decide to walk away, it should be out of peace, not avoidance. Either path is honorable if you choose it with integrity. I believe in you, Caleb. I always have. Mom." I sat there in the quiet studio for a long time, the letter resting in my hands. Her words were like a balm, soothing the frantic confusion that had been churning in my chest for weeks. She trusted me. She trusted me to decide. Not to react, but to choose. Her faith in me was the anchor I hadn't realized I was missing. Later that afternoon, I called Elias. I asked him to meet me again, but not at the storage unit. This time, our destination was Morgan Capital. As I walked through the towering glass doors of the lobby, I felt the shift in the atmosphere. Eyes followed me from every direction. I could hear the whispers ripple through the open-plan offices as employees saw my deactivated badge still clipped to my coat. Some people I'd known for years offered small, sympathetic nods. Others just stared at their screens, pretending I was invisible. None of it mattered. I wasn't there for them. I was there for him. Elias and I rode the elevator up to the executive floor in silence. He held a single, sealed manila folder. It contained only the most serious, most verifiable documents my mother had collected. We stepped out, and my father's assistant immediately moved to block our path. "Mr. Morgan is in a meeting," she said, her voice firm but with a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Elias just gave her a polite nod. "He'll want to see us." Before she could protest further, his office door swung open. My father emerged, mid-sentence with two board members. He was in his element, commanding, confident. But when he saw Elias and me standing there, his expression faltered. It was only for a split second, a crack in the marble facade, but I saw it. "Gentlemen," he said, turning back to the board members, his voice regaining its usual authority. "I'll finish this later." He gestured for us to enter his office. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, the performance was over.
He folded his arms, his posture radiating impatience. "Well?" he asked, his tone clipped.
"I assume you're here with demands." I looked him straight in the eye, my own voice calm. "No, I'm here to talk." He seemed genuinely caught off guard for a second. Then he gestured towards the plush leather chairs opposite his desk. We all sat. Elias placed the sealed folder on the polished surface of the table between us. My father's gaze flicked to the folder, then back to me. A flicker of understanding or maybe resignation crossed his face. "I see," he murmured. "So this is how you want to play it." "I'm not playing anything," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm deciding." He looked unconvinced, a familiar cynical curl to his lip. I continued. "You locked me out of everything at the company. You tried to make this house uncomfortable. You tried to corner me." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. "But none of that changes who I am." His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing, but he remained silent. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to ruin you. I'm here to make something very clear." At my signal, Elias opened the folder, but he didn't slide the contents across the table. The documents remained face down. I chose my words carefully, just as my mother had advised. Mom collected this information because she believed accountability mattered. Not to punish you, but because she didn't want me to be powerless. My father's posture, which had been relaxed and arrogant, stiffened. But he was listening. "I have a choice," I said. "One that affects both of us." His expression was a mask, completely unreadable. "I can send this to the board. I said quietly. I can send it to regulatory agencies. I can send it to anyone who would evaluate it objectively. His fingers curled into a fist against the tabletop. Or, I continued, my voice even, I can leave it sealed. If we establish two things moving forward, he raised a single skeptical eyebrow. And those are? First, I said, you reinstate my position without restrictions, not as a junior analyst who fetches coffee. As a partner in training, a role I've already earned. He opened his mouth to object, but I held up a hand, stopping him. Second, you agree to a mediated division of responsibilities, so I can eventually take over the portions of the company Mom intended me to lead. You can stay CEO for as long as you want, but my work will no longer be sidelined or dismissed. He stared at me for several long, silent seconds. His eyes were cold, judging, calculating the odds. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement. So you want power, he said, the words a statement, not a question. No, I replied, my voice clear and firm. I want respect. The room went completely still. Even the faint hum of the city outside seemed to fade away. Elias glanced from me to my father, his face impassive. My father's eyes hardened, but for the first time, something else flickered in their depths. Something I had never seen before. Realization. For the first time in my entire life, he saw me. He didn't see an inconvenience or a burden or an emotional afterthought. He saw a grown man. Someone he needed to negotiate with. What's the alternative? He asked, his voice low. I simply nodded toward the sealed file on the table. He let out a long, slow exhale. It wasn't the sound of anger or defeat. It was the sound of acceptance. Fine, he said. We'll negotiate. It wasn't a warm and fuzzy family moment. It wasn't a miracle. But it was honest. And for the first time in years, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. A few days later, I returned to the storage unit alone. I carefully placed my mother's letter back into the binder, a sense of quiet reverence filling the small, sterile space. I locked the unit door with a steady hand. Her plan had never been about revenge. It had been about giving me the strength to stand on my own. And in that moment, I finally understood what she truly wanted. It wasn't to destroy my father. It was to free me from the version of myself he had shaped. A version that stayed quiet. A version that stayed small. A version that waited for an approval he was incapable of giving. That part of me was gone. I walked out of the storage facility and into the bright afternoon light, taking a breath that felt deeper and cleaner than any I had in months. For the first time since losing her, I felt the beginning of something new. It wasn't victory.
It wasn't triumph, it was peace.
And with that peace came the absolute certainty that my mother's final gift hadn't been money or leverage, it was clarity. A lesson that I knew I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's choosing the path that lets you grow, not the one that just lets you win. Thank you for following my journey.